everybody. This is Dave Strong from the Schmitt Music Saxophone Shop, and I am here with Mr. Keegan Feller. He is a new member of the Saxophone Shop team. So Keegan has just joined us, a couple weeks now?
Yeah, a couple weeks now, Third week, I think, and we're plugging along.
But he's been a saxophone player for how many years?
Oh, since 5th grade.
5th grade. How many years is that?
Oh, geez,
get your age out here.
13, 14
13,
years?
14 years.
Yeah.
So, and I won't tell you 20-something years how long I've been playing. Actually, 30 years.
Yeah.
I'm old. Anyway, we are going to start regularly doing sort of a podcast, sort of a video talk about different saxophone subjects. In the future, we'd really like to start getting in some guest artists. You know, you might have seen previously, we had a little talk with Grace Kelly. That was a first try at that, which was wonderful. She's amazing. Yeah. But occasionally, just Keegan and I are going to talk. Yep. We're gonna pick a subject that we get asked a lot. So in the future, if you have any questions, if there's something you want to talk about, if there's a question you want us to answer, leave that in the comments below.
Yeah.
We'd love to have these based on what the saxophone community wants to hear. And we love answering those questions, and we're both ridiculous sax nerds and spend way too much time on websites talking about mouthpieces and reeds and ligatures and practice tips and all that kind of stuff. And so we'll talk to you too much about those things. But today we figure, speaking of those, mouthpieces. That is a huge topic. If you talk to any saxophone nerd, the number one thing is mouthpieces. What mouthpiece do you pick? What do you play? What mouthpieces are good for what music? What makes a difference? And one of the reasons I really like talking about this, and Keegan's going to have some viewpoint on this going forward too, I did it wrong for a very, very long time. I went through high school and college and picked what mouthpieces a teacher told me to pick, and sometimes that was a good decision. And when I got out into the real world and started just buying mouthpieces because I had a job and I had a couple of dollars to spend on them, I did it wrong over and over and over again because I didn't know what I was doing. So what I'd like us to talk about, we'll start with Keegan since I've already talked a bunch here, a little bit about that mouthpiece journey, what we've learned on that journey, what we're playing now, and when we're teaching or when we're working with students, what we recommend for different contexts and why. So I'm going to hand it over. Keegan, you start. I'll listen for a little bit.
Yeah, wow. So, it's quite the journey. And, nobody really ever told me that there were more mouthpieces than the stock one that came with my student instrument in 5th grade.
That's how my story starts, too.
I played that mouthpiece all the way through high school. It wasn't until college when I started at Mankato State my first year and was playing in Jazz 1 there. And I was playing on a stock mouthpiece on my alto, and Doug Snap down there was like, hey, try this mouthpiece.
And just to back up, stock mouthpiece.
Oh, yes.
If you've never tried mouthpieces, that's a term in the saxophone world.
Yep.
And what that generally means is that's something that came with your instrument. Right. I don't have an example of one of those here.
Oh, we should have brought one,
Basically, if you got a student instrument, what was in that case is probably a stock instrument, unless you lucked out. It's going to be made of plastic, almost for certain.
Yep.
And it's going to be just something that was made by a machine. Some of them are pretty good. The most common one that you'll see in a good way is a Yamaha 4C, or if you're on a barrier tenor, maybe a Yamaha 5C. Mm-hmm. And they're a very good, decent playing plastic mouthpiece. And if you start with that, great. That's a perfect thing to start with. And so I wanted to back up and define stock because I always forget not everybody knows
not
that,
everybody knows
lingo,
what a stock mouthpiece is.
But anyway, yes.
But so played on that stock mouthpiece until college, and they said, here, try some other things. Here are some other brands. And it was like a whole window opened up of, wow, there are so many different options and possibilities.
Overwhelmingly,
yeah. So it was kind of where to start. Yep. And we've got a couple examples here on the table with us. Really, the first thing that I jumped in, actually, I was playing tenor in that group. I wasn't playing alto. I played for maybe a month, and they were like, we need a tenor player. So I started on an Auto-Link Tone Edge, and I don't think I have one here. But that was kind of my first taste of it, which I think is a little bit further than where I would normally go right away, hindsight being 2020. And for my alto, I went right to a Van Doren V16, which I would say is kind of the standard jazz mouthpiece.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, and when we're talking about these, kind of to give my side of that first part of it, or not my side, my story of that first kind of, same thing. I was playing on the mouthpiece that came in my horn. I didn't know the term stock mouthpiece. I just knew, hey, I even got a nicer horn.
I have a mouthpiece.
I got a Selmer Series 2. Yeah, it had a C-star in it. which we'll talk about that in a second, but it had a decent mouthpiece in it, but I didn't know the difference. I didn't know what we're talking. So when we're moving to that first nicer mouthpiece, you mentioned the V16.
Yeah.
V16 is a jazz mouthpiece. We won't go too into depth of particular models. The bigger, more important thing is to talk about how it's made and what it's shaped like, which is going to affect what kind of music. So when we say a classical mouthpiece, that's going to be something that's great for your concert band, your wind ensemble, when you're doing solo and ensemble pieces. That's what we'd call classical. There's a lot of words for it, but classical is the easiest one.
Yeah.
Then we talk about jazz mouthpiece. That's, as you said, it's a huge world because jazz means so many different things. But that's basically when you're playing if you're in school, that's when you're playing in your jazz band, your combo, your big band. When you're getting into college, kind of similar things. And that even verges, people will say the stuff that they're using even for pop and rock music, a lot of people will use the term jazz mouthpiece, but that, in my opinion, is even another category. But it gets a little bit of gray area in there.
Definitely.
But yeah, so my start, basically, stock mouthpiece all the way through high school. I was playing at in Shell Lake, Wisconsin. There's the Shell Lake Jazz Camp.
Yeah,
we were actually
just
there this
on
week.
Wednesday.
But if you're from anywhere else in the country, you may not have heard of it, but you might have. But anyway, a teacher there, I was playing a David Sanborn tune and probably playing with about that much volume. Yep. And eventually, it was kind of a mind-blowing thing when my teacher said, "Have you tried a jazz mouthpiece?" And I was like, "There's mouthpieces for jazz?" And it was like, "Yes, go somewhere and try some." And so that's where I think the first one I got was a Meyer 7. Now, if you're not familiar with these worlds, there are a lot of brands. And there's a lot of brands that have a lot of history to them. So what you mentioned, that Auto Link, that's a company that's been around for a long time. The one I had, the Meyer or Meyer Brothers, they've been around since the 30s, 40s, 50s. But they've gone through some changes over that time. So weirdly, you may look up, what did John Coltrane play? What did Cannonball Adderley play? And you're going to see Auto Link or you're going to see Meyer. We won't go deep into it in this video, although that'll be something great for another video. Those two categories are very deep because it depends on what year it's from, whether it was handmade, whether it was made once they were bought out. Both of those companies were bought out by the Babbitt Company over in Indiana. And there's a lot of good mouthpieces in that whole history, but it is its own 1 hour video or more just talking about those. But when we're talking about those are kind of great as in that first step up, or they can be. But the second one that you said bears repeating. The Van Doren stuff is very consistent. Most of the mouthpiece we're talking about, for jazz, the V16, for classical, the Optimum line, are, at least in my opinion, they're great first step-up mouthpieces because they're consistently made, and they're made to be very versatile. So that Optimum mouthpiece would be something that would work in pretty much any classical genre, whereas the V16 is a good all-around jazz piece. And in a minute we'll get to what I mean when I say that, because there's some pieces that can be very fun, but maybe not appropriate for everything. But
and
that's kind of where I started. But
and that was kind of something that I figured out as I started, realizing there was these two different camps of types of mouthpiece, classical versus jazz. As I got into a huge mouthpiece trying frenzy of, well, I need a mouthpiece for my concert band, and I also need a mouthpiece that I can play for jazz band. So getting into the whole multiple mouthpiece things, and we'll talk a little bit about both of those different things, and what's appropriate for classical, what is a good jazz, and like we kind of already alluded to, the V16 is going to be a good jazz piece. That's
a good all around. There's a couple of those. The two most frequent I see, it's hard to go wrong with the Van Doren V16 or a D'Addario Jazz Select. In classical, the Selmer classical mouthpieces, like a Selmer C-Star, a Selmer Concept, or one of the S90s are a great place to start. And as we previously mentioned, the Van Doren Optimum series. But so from that, where did you go from that? What did you
so from there, I after trying all these different mouthpieces, I tried the C-Stars, I tried the Optimums, and I ended up going with a C-Star. And kind of like we said, it's kind of like the stock one that comes with any Selmer, like a Series 2 or something like that. And that got me all the way through college. I never switched my classical mouthpiece.
And that's the same here. And that's a good thing, by the way. We talk about, especially you talk to people who've played for a lot of years, you hear these stories, and I was one of these stories. I've had 50 mouthpieces in my life.
Yep.
You don't have to do that. And that's
No.
kind of the point of this. Part of this is just to have a fun talk, but you really don't have to.
No.
If you do the right stuff, you can center it in a lot quicker,
yeah.
and not be 50 mouthpieces
Pieces
in
deep
before
you figure out what you
it out.
actually
That's the
need,
wrong
yeah.
way to do it, but I know I haven't.
You've
I know
done it, and I've
done a
kind
little
of
bit
gotten
that.
into there.
You might not be at 50, but
no, I'm not quite to 50. I've never owned more than 3, so I've tried more than 50.
Good.
I've
for
never
you.
owned more than 50.
I'm a little jealous. So let's kind of, that's a little bit of our story, but let's stop and let's talk a little bit about that process, because one of the things we do a lot, I work with a lot of young players moving into that first classical or first jazz mouthpiece. Keegan does the same.
I do a lot of that.
And there's a bit of a process to that, and the process isn't buy a bunch of mouthpieces and figure it out and have one for every different, if you're a professional collector or you're just a collector, I should say, and that's what you want to do, great. But I think a couple of mouthpieces. How many mouthpieces do you think a versatile college musician should have?
A college musician, you should probably have 2, I would say.
And
you should have one for your wind ensemble or your private classical lessons if you're taking classical lessons, and you should have one if you're playing in jazz band that you play in your jazz group.
Thank you for giving that answer.
Yes.
In my opinion, that is the right answer.
It's not 12. The answer is not 12.
It isn't. And and if that's your hobby and you love trying stuff and you have a lot of money to throw at it, sure. But really, I think especially a young player, you find stuff that works well, and the rest of it, as you practice, as you settle in my opinion,
my next thing,
that when you're trying out mouthpieces, that day you pick it, that's the worst and most uncomfortable you're ever going to sound on that mouthpiece. Right. And then as you settle in, you're going to unlock all the different ways it can play.
Yep.
You're going to get flexibility. It's going to get better with time as it's your interface between the saxophone and you. Yeah. And so you have to figure that out a little bit. And every time I switch mouthpieces, I do that very carefully these days. But if I do switch because I've just found something I really like, it takes a while before I feel like that's mine. That's how I play. So yeah. What would you say for a saxophone player never tried mouthpieces? Yeah. Let's say their teacher says getting a classical mouthpiece. How does that process look to you?
Yeah, for me, I would say come and see us if you're looking at trying those mouthpieces. Come try them first. Don't just go and buy them.
If you don't live in Minnesota,
we can send stuff.
We can send stuff to you. Or also, if there's a place near you, go there.
Go there.
I will be happy to send you mouthpieces. But if you can just walk into a place that carries a wide selection, that's the best way to do it.
I would say that is step one.
And but call us too. We're happy.
We're happy to help.
But just trying them in person is absolutely
going to be
the way
step
to
one.
do it, because we're all a little different, and that fit. What's a good fit for me isn't going to be a good fit for you necessarily.
Right.
So, yeah, absolutely.
And step 2, well, even maybe before step 1, listen to what your teacher is telling you. You know, if your teacher gives you a recommendation and they say, here's what you need to go try, we see that a lot. Kids come in and they're like, my teacher said try this, this, and this. Yeah. And we say, absolutely.
Well, I'm never going to argue with a teacher, because they know you more than I know you at that point. Unless you're someone I've worked with a ton, that teacher's going to know where you're coming from and where they see you going. Yep. So teacher's recommendation, you're right, absolutely.
Right. And myself, as a teacher, having that background as well, I would say, if you come into that store, the first things you should be asking for is, let's see a C star, let's see an optimum. Yeah. Those would be 2 very standard pieces that any music store worth its salt should have in stock for saxophone players.
Yeah, and then kind of from there, what I'd say is spend some time. This is something that I think mouthpiece choice is as important as horn choice, and it's a less expensive choice, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do your due diligence. I always worry when someone comes in and blows 2 notes and says, that one. And my question is, are you sure?
Right.
So what I'd say, some of the big things that I find I have to encourage myself to do, much less other people, but when I try a mouthpiece, I need to play the extremes. I want to play as low as I can play, as high as I can play, and with as much dynamic contrast. So I'm going to play down to my low B flat, up to at least a high F sharp. If you're comfortable with any altissimo, see how the altissimo works.
Feels as well.
And then, do stuff. One of my biggest tests is play down to a low B flat as quietly as you can. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have a mouthpiece that's not a good fit, you may hear that, it starts falling apart. A lot of mouthpieces sound beautiful when you're playing really loud or really quiet, but won't do the other one. Yeah. And this is true for classical and jazz mouthpieces. You want to be versatile. Unless I only play in rock bands and I only play Careless Whisper, Yeah, great. Do that.
Cool.
Find the one mouthpiece that does that well.
You can play careless.
Otherwise, it's very easy. One of the examples that we have here, example of a high baffle mouthpiece. Now, baffle is basically, we're talking about the inside of the mouthpiece, whether it's wide or open, or whether they squeeze that down. And squeezing it down gives you some immediate benefits that are very initially tempting. You play it, wow, I'm 5 times louder, and I can play brighter and punchy, and my altissimo is easier, and it's easy to go, great, I'll buy it. But if you don't test, can I play pretty on it? Can I play a ballad? Can I play down low and my low range sound controlled? That's what you pay for if that's too extreme. Now you may know, hey, I'm willing to get used to that for the style of music I'm playing. But if you're young and it's your first mouthpiece and you get something like this, your teacher's probably going to be upset with you and upset with whoever set you up with something like this. So it's one of those, balance and everything is really important. And classical's a little more traditional. Keegan's exactly right. Then you try a few options, especially if it's your first one. Try some very very traditional pieces like the C Star, like the Concept, like the Van Doren Optimum series. But when you're getting into jazz mouthpieces, it's easy to accidentally get a rock mouthpiece, because that's in the same category. So just be really careful about that. When you're practicing them, or I should say when you're trying them out, do those extremes. Make sure it does everything you want it to do, and it's easy to fall in love with a piece because of one thing it does and not realize that it doesn't do those other things. Right. Any other tips that you have of kind of first trying them out?
Not that I think that's a pretty good starting place, especially if it's your first time choosing an upgraded mouthpiece, or you're getting away from your stock one. That's a really great place to start.
Yeah. That's the thing. This video could be 1 minute long. It could be get a bunch of mouthpieces, play a bunch of mouthpieces, spend enough time with them, do everything, and know what genre you're aiming it for.
Right.
You don't want to be switching between 4 or 5 mouthpieces.
Yeah.
But if you're doing both classical and jazz, eventually you'll want to have a mouthpiece for each. Now, what I would say, if you can only do one, and you really can, it's your first one, usually people are going to get the classical mouthpiece first. The exception would be that when we talk stock mouthpieces are generally the design of a classical mouthpiece. And a couple of things that we can talk about here before we get before we bore everyone too much and they leave. A couple of the things that matter. We already talked about the baffle. Now, every mouthpiece is either going to kind of on the inside be open and flat, or the baffle kind of up to the front is going to squeeze that chamber in. So that has the same effect if you ever take a garden hose and you put your thumb over half of it. Boy, it's a lot more powerful. You put your thumb over a little more, really powerful. But also, what does it do? It gets thinner and thinner. It's the same amount of water, so
and higher pressure.
Yeah, exactly. So there's pluses and minuses. It's all about balance. Now, the other big thing, there's a lot of factors. Mouthpieces have a lot of subtle things. The other big thing is the tip opening. You want to talk about what tip opening is?
Yeah, let's talk about a little bit of a tip opening. So the tip opening that you're going to see is going to be the gap that's in between the beak of the mouthpiece and where your reed comes out. Like that. And you'll see it different ones that you can see from usually 4 is usually the smallest that you'll see reasonably, 3 or 4, all the way up to probably, I would say, reasonably a 9.
And when we're saying those numbers are different on every instrument.
Every mouthpiece and every
basically, we use these numbers 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they go down to 1. 0, I guess, would be where the reed doesn't leave the thing.
Yes.
And they go infinitely up technically, but really, again, it's about what's appropriate and what's going to be playable and comfortable for you. And really, for classical mouthpieces, generally, you're seeing a 3 or a 4. Like a C Star. We keep saying that word C Star. C Star, Selmer, who makes that, old school French company, and they do things a little differently. Instead of numbers, they use letters. So C, A, B, C, it's a 3. And star in the saxophone mouthpiece world, for whatever reason, means 1/2. So C Star means 3 1/2. So it's right in that sweet spot for a classical mouthpiece. And that kind of comes from the old tradition of clarinet mouthpieces and stuff like that. Generally, you're blowing through a little smaller opening. You use a little bit harder reed. And so the saxophone players of that time and the tradition of that was, hey, let's do it that way too. Now, when we move to the jazz mouthpieces, two things tend to happen. You get a little more of that baffle, so again, you're blowing through a smaller chamber. To compensate for that, the tip opening usually gets bigger. Now, there are absolutely examples of the opposite of that, but in my experience, a little bigger tip opening when you have a jazz mouthpiece or a higher baffle is going to help you. Now, for if you're getting your first one, I would highly suggest for alto you're doing a 5, 6, maybe a 7.
Mm-hmm.
For a tenor, you're doing a 6, 7, maybe an 8.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, like I play an 8.5. I used to play a 9. That's great. No, but really, if you could only try a 2 or 3 in that range for alto and tenor is a really safe spot.
Yeah.
Because what they're only putting a little bit of a baffle in the average jazz mouthpiece, and that's just enough so that when you will notice the difference when you go to stand up and take a solo. Hey, you can get a little more air through. You can play a little louder. You can play a little brighter.
Yeah.
But it's not so much that you stick out like a sore thumb when you're trying to blend.
Right.
Because generally jazz players, and
Yeah.
you got to do both.
You have to do a lot of
Playing in a big band, you want to be
able to blend.
blended,
Yeah.
beautiful section sound.
Yep.
But you also need to be able to stand up and scream a little
right.
bit when you need to.
And going with that, I will say that was the very first problem that I ran into with my jazz mouthpieces. I had bought a V16. I was playing lead alto in college. I started with the V16. And I was like, I kind of want to try something else. And I fell down, made the mistake of not coming and seeing somebody like Dave,
Sure.
who could talk me off of the ledge, so to speak.
Yep.
And I went and I bought like a stock Auto-Link Super Tone Master metal mouthpiece online for like $60.
If it makes you feel any better, that's exactly the first thing I bought too.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That does make me feel
and
better.
That's the cool thing now. I'm in my 40s. I didn't have as much internet to look up when I was doing this.
Right.
And what I would do is, what did Coltrane play? Okay, it's that. Or I just look at the newest, shiniest thing,
Right.
and it's very easy to get the wrong thing. Like I said. And
Absolutely.
I was either buying a super high baffle, small tip opening, or a big tip opening, low baffle,
Right.
or I just get, hey, Auto-Link, that's good, right?
Right.
And that's not, you're not necessarily picking the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But it's really about having enough expert advice and being in a place that can find the appropriate fit for you.
Right.
And when, the biggest thing, if you can get into a shop, that's why I say we'll talk to you on the phone, we'll send you stuff. But if you can get into a shop, that's where
Definitely.
someone can listen to you play, hand you another
Yeah.
mouthpiece,
Yep.
listen to you play again and say, oh, based on what I'm hearing, try this.
Try this.
And,
Yeah,
any good shop's goal is going to be to set you up with something that's going to give you success going down the road, too.
Absolutely.
Again, if I hear someone play a big, loud, high baffle mouthpiece and they say, oh, I'm playing in my wind ensemble, even if it's a great mouthpiece, that is not the right
That is
mouthpiece
not
for
the
that
place for
situation.
it,
And
no.
so really, Keegan, absolutely right. Teacher first. If you're especially if you're studying privately, talk to your teacher. They're going to know what's up.
Yeah.
But the other thing, get some advice and try a bunch of stuff.
Right.
And it's really, it'll keep you from buying this big pile
Right.
of mouthpieces in your first few years of playing.
And even, like you said, if you're playing something super high baffle like that in concert band, you can even find that. So what I found is in jazz band, that was the wrong piece for what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
I found everybody else was playing hard rubber, and here I am on this metal Auto-Link, just screaming over the top of everybody, playing super bright, and was sticking out of the section. So I said, okay, well, I need to go back to hard rubber. Now, that doesn't mean that a hard rubber piece can't be bright and punchy.
That's actually,
but
I know we're getting far down the rabbit
we
hole
are
here.
getting in the rabbit hole.
But true or false, viewers? Does metal mouthpiece make you brighter and
Right.
louder?
Yeah, drop it in the comments below. What do you think?
Pause the video and
do
we'll play
it.
some Jeopardy music here.
Yeah,
So-
right.
And the answer is no.
No.
Metal does have a different ring. But in my experience, if you have a metal mouthpiece and a hard rubber mouthpiece that are exactly the same dimensions-wise, they will have a different sound, but this won't be way brighter and louder. In fact,
No.
it could be darker and a little colder
could be,
sounding.
right.
Really, a lot of the time, people think metal is bright and loud. Because if you go back 20, 30 years, it was easier to make a really high baffle mouthpiece with metal material, and
Right.
you can thin out the sidewalls, you can make the mouthpiece a little smaller. It's
So-
just stable that way.
Yeah.
You can have a crazy loud and bright hard rubber mouthpiece. It just, you didn't see it that way for a while, so it kind of became the
and
the thought behind
and prime example. Now this isn't hard rubber again. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but this piece here is actually a perfect example of that. I would say this is a pretty bright piece for the most part.
Yeah.
But a different material. It's not metal, but you kind of get a similar sound quality.
Definitely.
With what it is.
So the real short answer is, material, does it change the sound? Yeah, a bit.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be the first thing you're thinking about. Really play what's comfortable for you, and play and listen to the sound, and try to ignore shiny, fancy objects and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And if you try a metal mouthpiece and it's the best thing for you, awesome.
Yeah.
I've played them throughout the years, and you have too, I'm sure,
Yeah.
as we were
Yep.
just saying. So really, 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 it's all about the way they shape the inside, the way it's shaping your hair, and the way it fits your particular physiology. You know,
Right.
everyone's face is different.
Yep.
So you and I are going to play the same thing. There's no way we're going to sound
We're gonna
exactly
sound-
the
yeah,
same. Even if we
exactly.
studied the same thing, even if we're doing everything
Have
else the same.
teacher, we could
it's-
sound totally different.
The same way the mouthpiece changes your sound, your face and your mouth changes the sound.
Yeah.
So it is a personal thing. You know, you wouldn't have someone else try on shoes for you and tell you if they're comfortable, even if you're
Exactly.
pretty sure you have the same size feet.
Right.
You just, you have to try them.
Absolutely.
But teachers' recommendations and all that other stuff is a great place to start.
Yeah.
And then you go from there.
And you know, it kind of goes back to kind of one of those conversations. So a little bit of backstory. Dave hired me at our Woodbury store back in 2018, 2017, back in the day. But I remember distinctly having this conversation. It was a slow middle of the week, and there's the green socks kind of theory that, you know, I wear green socks. If you wear green socks, you're going to play better.
Yep.
You know, same
Yeah.
thing with mouthpieces. Just because I say Van Doren V16 A7 is going to make you sound great, well, it may not. You know, you need to find what fits you and what fits your sound
That's
that you're
the asterisk
going
that's
for.
on anything we say, and we'll be doing lots of equipment videos.
Right.
It's a great reference to hear how someone sounds on stuff, but really, you got to try it yourself too.
Yeah.
Well, cool. We have already talked a lot. We may
Yeah.
even cut out a couple of my rambling bits, but maybe not. So feel free to fast forward if this one's too long.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, this is a great start. If you have any questions about mouthpieces, equipment, any of that kind of stuff, but we're talking about mouthpieces here. If you have any questions, anything you've heard about, if you want to dispute anything, the mouthpiece where you can get on the internet, you can argue about mouthpieces for days.
Yep.
And the answer is it's different for everybody,
Yeah.
and it's not an exact science.
Right.
So we're giving you our best viewpoint
Yeah.
advice, and we'll continue to do so.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
It
and
is.
saxophone's fun, and
you know,
music is fun.
a
And,
couple of great resources too. We were talking a little bit about
Yeah.
tip openings, and maybe we'll link this as well.
We
but
should.
The Theo
Yeah,
Wani
yeah.
page has some really great things on tip opening, what they're appropriate for. I've got some laminated stuff here in the shop, but it's online. Maybe we'll either
if you
insert
have
that in
not,
the video and
we'll put a link for sure. I know years ago when I first started to actually get how mouthpieces worked, Theo Wani. Now you've maybe heard of him because he makes a huge line of mouthpieces now. But years ago he was a guy who just refaced mouthpieces, and he would collect vintage mouthpieces. And he made an amazing website. It was before he had his site. Now it was mouthpiecemuseum.com, I believe.
Yeah, something like that.
We'll put the link to the. He cataloged and talked about, and he has diagrams, and he is getting it as scientific as he possibly can. And he'll give a great presentation. If you ever get to see him present, he's incredible
really
with that.
fantastic.
But yeah, we'll link to his page. A lot of the stuff we talked about where we're doing like pointing at things and analogies, he's gotten some really nice
Really
diagrams. So
detailed
check that
in-depth
stuff out if
stuff.
you really want to dig in. That helped me a ton, and I know you've looked at it too.
It's been very helpful.
But other than that, please let us know if you have any ideas for future videos, stuff that we can talk about.
Yeah.
Please let us know if you have any questions. You can reach out to us in the comments below, or as always at the saxophone shop at schmittmusic.com. Otherwise, we could talk about this for 5 more hours. Maybe someday we will, but probably we'll spare you that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks again.
Thank you.